Welcome to another episode of Threads of Enlightenment. As usual, what we do here is first I have the opportunity to welcome our guests. I know they're coming with a couple of things I deem very, very expensive because I've learned that it is very, very expensive. Time. Time is one of the most precious commodity offered to mankind while we're here on this planet. We put numbers to it, years, days, and lifetimes, and so forth. But one must learn to respect time. One must learn to honor time. One must learn to fall in love with her. When you love time, you will make your life valuable. The other is the journey. Journey housed who we were. So much pain, so much beauty, so much stuff, but it gave birth to the greatness of who we are. And so we want to thank Denise for coming and sharing both of these precious commodities with us. And we are honored to have her here in our space at Threads of Enlightenment. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. Such a beautiful co-creative space that you have here, Ken. So, yes. So, I would love to just share a bit of my journey and how I came to be working with
Well, you need to
people and
introduce
helping them
yourself.
along their path.
Introduce, tell them your name.
Yes. S- So, I am Denise Miceli, and I am an intuitive life coach that has had a journey of teaching and helping and supporting. I've been coaching people for 3 decades, uh, both individuals, children, teachers, and also worked with people in their health journeys. And, so I've created a space for people to really unpack why they're feeling stuck in life, why they are, just not happy. A lot of times these days, I find that people don't even
Yeah.
know why. They're very disconnected from their
Wow.
inner world. And so I feel that my job now, because I've had a connection to my inner world even as a child, and then life happens, right? And you
Yeah.
come in and out of it. And, but what I know now is what I knew so long ago, that our inner world is
Yeah.
the key to us being able to make sense out of the outer world, but yet not find our meaning there, but be finding all of our meaning within. And I think that's a journey that so many people are
Yeah.
in need of today, in these sort of transformational times that we're going through. So that's my passion and my dark night journey. I do like to call it, because yes, it's dramatic, but there was a period of time, and it was right around coincided with the pandemic. So there you go, where things just began to
Yeah.
crash down around me, and things that I believed in, things that I um, really became disconnected with my inner self, my thoughts, my beliefs, and my actions. They weren't really jiving with each other. And then of course, the world just sort of collapsed. And so it gave me the time I was fortunate enough that to be able to survive and take more time for my inner work and commit back to the daily meditations. Life happens and you let
Yeah.
go of practices. And I tell people, because that is the biggest tool, is how do you create self-awareness no matter what style of healing you choose to work with in your journey. Is if you don't have a self-awareness practice, it is more
Yeah.
difficult for you. So many times I will just reintroduce people to that, or just try different things with them, because I don't, just like with my coaching, I don't believe there's one way to get to
Yeah.
health, physical health. There isn't one way or one
Yeah.
formula. I used to have people who would be like, I want to lose 50 pounds in 2 weeks, and it's just like, there's reality, and
Yeah.
then there's, the culture teaches us, a lot of cultures today teach us there's an easy way out.
Mm-hmm.
There's a pill, there's a new pill out. And it just puts people in this mode of disconnect from themselves. And then they're like, well, I'm taking the pill, but nothing's happening, or I feel sick now, or now I have all these
Yeah.
other problems, and you don't know what's really causing it. So, we have to get away from this idea that we can escape
Yeah.
that inner work. So, so what my journey, I'll talk about this one dark night experience, is that, I had left a career in K-12 education to go out and to start working with individuals in health and wellness, and very passionate about it, have had my own journey with it, and feel healthier now, decades later, than I was in my youth. So I love to share that passion and excitement with people and help them to see the results of what they're doing, and so forth. But what I started to see was that people were really getting stuck. Now, of course, the pandemic was going on around us, but people would be excited that they had all this information about, like, what their nutrition has been and what it's brought to them. And that's what I generally would do, is have them really look at what they were doing, and then how was it feeling, and kind of come draw their own conclusions, right? Get to the root causes. And people would be like, okay, I've got this plan and this is what I'm going to do. And they would come back the next week and they'd be like, I don't know what's wrong with me. I can't get started. I don't know what's wrong with me. I know what to do, and I'm looking at my choices, and I'm just running in the
Yeah.
other direction, back to what's familiar. And so I started to see this pattern, and I thought, what I was doing had such a high success rate before the pandemic. So what's happening? People are, starting to really confront whether they're happy in their lives, because all of a sudden things slowed
Hmm.
down, right? They had to, like, change the way they work. All of a sudden their kids are at home. So all of us, there's all of these changes. And so it makes us start to question everything. And so they, they began to really struggle. And this is where I started to learn about subconscious
Yeah.
healing and why it's so powerful. So I'll talk a little bit about what I learned, that really our conscious mind is only really responsible and aware of about 10% of what goes
Hmm.
on in our brain. So if we're sitting there and drawing up plans, and, writing macronutrient plans and workout plans and all of this stuff, and we don't really address what's going on in 90% of our thought patterns, our behaviors, our repeated
Yeah.
thoughts, right, our beliefs, then we're going to run into those, and our brain doesn't have a way of knowing, like, where is this thought coming from. It's not that aware of those things. So we'll go ahead with the best of conscious intention, right? Mood boards, memes on our phone, all of these things, but our subconscious memories, which were created from the time we were
Yeah.
conceived through age 7. Now, it doesn't mean we can't have other traumas and things happen in life, but that time period, we are so pure. We haven't been completely, we're living in kind of a theta
Hmm.
state. We're living in a very imaginative state. We have come in with a clean
Yeah.
soul, so to speak, right? We come into these bodies and it's a temporary situation, but our soul is very imaginative. It's very aware of what's
Hmm.
possible. And we are very impacted by those first experiences, our caregivers, our families, um, very highly impressionable. So, depending on the situation that you had during that time, you may have or may not have had unconditional love. And if you did not, or if you had sort of conditional love, like you had to behave a certain way, then you learned to change your behavior to get that approval, to get that unconditional love. And a lot of times, I work with people that are, probably average over 40. I will have women tell me, I was told to be
Yeah.
seen and not heard. I was told to behave in this way. And, I thought that I let go of all of that, but I feel like I'm not seen or heard in my life today. And so when they go to make a big change, like changing their nutrition or changing their routines, maybe they want to start meditating. and others around them are like, what are you doing? There's resistance because they're used to having this person a certain way, and now they want to go on this inner journey. And it starts to bring up some of those things because it's like, well, have I really been aligned with my soul? Have I really been aligned with who I really am? Or have I been performing in a way that gets me what I feel that I need? So, with that subconscious activity going on, I like to call it that it kind of has a negativity bias because the way that it shows up in our adult lives is that we are reacting, and I like to use the example of triggering because triggering wasn't even a word 10 years
Yeah.
ago that we heard very often. It was really used more in psychology, but now it's like everyone's triggered by
Yeah.
everything. Why is that? It's because we are challenged to survive in these times that we're in. We are trying to, become more connected with who we are. Most people, in one way or another, are realizing they're disconnected from the self, the true inner being. And so it's like everyone is trying to change something. And let's face it, we have to change to conform to the times that we're living in, which are very transformational. So, how do you begin to do that when you start to see these patterns rearing up? And for a lot of women that I work with, it shows up as people pleasing because it's easier, and I tell them, it's not a label, it's a behavior. It's an adaptive behavior that you found and it worked for you. So now there's a strong part of you that's committed to that because you know what? It protected you. It kept you safe. And so that part of you can be, you can make
Hmm.
friends with it and say, hey, younger part, maybe you were formed at age 4, but you know what? I'm an adult now. That part doesn't know that. That subconscious part of you is there as a protector. So we talk to it. We get you in a relaxed mode. Again, we might do sound, we might do breath, we do some type of, I like to try different tools just like I would with
Yeah.
with kids. You know, what is it that will help you get into a relaxed state? You can let go of, the racing thoughts and all of that. And then let's talk to your parts. Let's identify them. Let's understand where they came from. And let's let them know that they can stand down a bit. I like to use like different metaphors with this because it impresses upon people and their inner selves is, ask them to take the back seat. They don't need to
Yeah.
drive
Yeah.
the bus anymore, right? You're capable now of looking at situations and saying, you know, I really want to be honest here. I really want to tell my friends I don't want to go out for drinks after work. I promised myself I was going to go home and have a chill night and read this book I'm dying to finish. Whatever it is, you don't even need an excuse. But a lot of times people will say, it's just easier to go along. It's easier because why? That's become a comfort zone because of that protective part that we developed. And we sometimes have more than one protective part. We might have one that's with a partner. We might have one that is with our friends around drinking or alcohol. We develop them around situations. And so when people find themselves like, gosh, I keep making these health goals and I can't get to them, a lot of times it's tied to not wanting to rock the boat. And so they'll say, well, I guess in a way I'm lying because I'm saying, okay, I'll go along with it because it's easier than me asserting who I am and saying what I need. And there's this part of me that fears what will happen if I do. I don't want to anger people. I don't want to, people will say, I don't want to have a confrontation with others. And it just shows me their level of disconnect with who they really are. So the work is about really helping them identify what is the primary emotion that seems to repeat itself in your life, whether it's through like a relationship with a boss or, a certain group of people. But you might even change the job, change the people, but this emotion keeps cropping up. It's your soul calling you to say, there is a sadness about your life that no matter how you change things, it stays with you, right? People who have been on antidepressants for many, many years, they haven't, they're putting a band-aid on something and not getting to the root of why do I default
Hmm.
to sadness? Or for some, it's anxiety. I talk about this continuum of depression and anxiety. And I say that when we have a long-standing depression, we are not letting go of something in the past. We keep thinking if I think about it a different way, it'll change it, but there's no changing it.
Yeah.
It is what it is. And the people who have anxiety are just overthinking the future, which again, we can exercise our inner being and our will, but we don't have control over that either. So it's not being fully present puts us on that spectrum of depression or anxiety. So we work through by starting to look at what is the primary emotion that keeps coming back. And we try to find the root of it. We try to just bring up a little piece of it. And then through using a type of neuro linguistic programming, we just
Hmm.
talk to it. We just simply talk to it and say, whatever part you are, we love you, we thank you, we acknowledge you, we develop a friendship with you. And it developed a doctor called Dr. Gary Flint. He's no longer with us, but he's written many books, and he based it both on NLP and also on family systems therapy, which is very much about the parts we develop from our family
Hmm.
of origin. And I can say that, this was my journey through the pandemic of just, really starting to see things that were working 95% of the time, all of a sudden 50-50. I was like, something's not right here. And it wasn't just my business life, it was my personal life as well. And I realized that I was putting myself again in the position of trying to do everything too much for others instead of leading them to it and letting them do the work. So it's in essence another form of sort of people pleasing. And so what I started realizing was that I was disconnected from who I was. I felt like an imposter syndrome. I felt like, that if we let people pleasing behaviors or putting our own needs last or just not feeling like it's worth going through the trouble of articulating our needs, then it can go into a full blown imposter syndrome. Because what does that really stand for? It's when you feel like I'm doing these roles in life, but I'm just going through the motions and I'm not
Yeah.
really happy and it's not really using all of my gifts. So what am I doing? And that's kind of what happened just before the pandemic as well. Was I was looking at this career that I had built, which I was
Hmm.
very good at, because again, I was helping people, but it was not going to the depth that I knew I was capable of helping people to get to. And so I loved working with the young kids because I could find what they cared about and I could help them to see the roots of like how their behavior was impacting them getting better at the things they loved and so forth. So I love that part of it, but I was longing for something deeper. I wanted to be the teacher and guide for people to get to this inner being place. And so that was another place where I was faced with, oh my gosh, I've done all this work, a 20-year career. How do I just walk away from it? But when every day the emotion became sadness, going to work and in the morning feeling sad and leaving work and feeling the same way, my soul was calling me to say, yes, this is good, but there's something better. There's something more you are meant to be doing, and you need to pay attention to it. So despite, what everybody else thought, you're on this trajectory and you can go to this level and all of that, I looked at that and I saw my soul even getting smaller, just getting less of a voice. And I was able to walk away
At what
from it
age?
because I trusted that at that age, and that wasn't that long ago. That was in 2017. So I was, I started that career
Hmm.
a little late in my 30s. So I did 20 years there. So it was in my early 50s. And, to make a change like that these
Yeah.
days at that age, it was like, Oh my gosh, because it's not so easy to get
Yeah.
employed again, especially if you don't want to be in that arena. And I kind of knew I had this talent of connecting with people, helping them find the roots of issues, and I was really good at that, but it was all conscious
Hmm.
work. And I knew that there was this bigger part of me that could have such a bigger impact. And so I I did. I sold my home. I moved out of the city I lived in, and I was going to walk away. And that's how much I was trusting. It was just a little piece of my inner being that I had access to, but it was still loud enough in that emotional pain that was continuing. That was like, I don't know what it is, but I know it's not
Tell me
this.
something about your
And
childhood, Denise. Where did you pick up
yeah, so
the people pleasing attitude or belief? Where did that
yeah,
come from with you?
yeah, and yeah, exactly. That really is where it all started because I grew up in a family that was
Hmm.
very emotional and Italian Greek family, very patriarchal and very I had never really felt that I fit in. And so I was the middle child as well. And my parents got together very young, had us very young. So they were what I now look back and think they were just
Hmm.
emotionally immature and they didn't have good parenting. So at a very young age, I was very imaginative. I can remember things that I did at 4 and 5, and I was in my own imaginative world. And I guess through that, I was deeply in touch with my inner being. But then I started to see and experience things within my family where I was kind of getting the idea that I wasn't
Yeah, yeah,
normal. I was getting the idea that I was just kind of on the edge, a little bit. And I was okay with that. But it created some um, uh, need in me to sort of be able to have value in
yeah.
that family. And what ended up happening, because I didn't realize it then, but I was becoming the helper. I was becoming the rescuer at that young age. If my parents were upset, they were
Hmm.
doting on me. They were talking to me about it as young as, I want to say, 8,
Hmm.
9, 10. And so at that age was already looking into yoga, was already, I remember buying the Transcendental Meditation book, which was one of the first books, that came out about meditation. And so uh, I started to go inward to try to make sense of the things that were happening around me. And so I'm not sure if we're Seems like we froze up.
Lost you.
Okay, yeah. It froze up, so I was just kind of waiting, and then I just logged back
Yeah.
out and in.
So you were at 10
All
years,
right.
at that age, that's where you were.
Yes. Yes. So at that age, I had already started to meditate.
Really? At 10 years old?
I found I was reading about it and I was practicing it. In fact, I can
Wow.
recall I was in Catholic school. My family was, very,
Yeah.
traditional. And so I would at lunchtime, I have pictures of myself in my Catholic school uniform, laying in the grass with my palms up. And, and the other girls were like, what is she doing? They used to love having me to sleepovers because I would do the sleep sort of
Yeah.
talking meditation. I didn't know what I was doing. I just it was like they
Yeah.
loved my voice and I was very soothing and they would invite me and everybody would be out like a light in 10 minutes or so just doing
Yeah.
relaxation. And I had only gone to hatha yoga, things like that, but I felt such an affinity to it. It was like it was
Wow.
calling me almost because it was the situation that I was in my family became more and
Yeah.
more intense. My parents became at odds with each other and were fighting. And I became a protector of my younger siblings because I was afraid for them. There were things that were being said that I knew were very harmful. And so there was a sense in me of, I've got to take care of
Yeah.
everyone first. And I know
Pick it
that's
up.
where that people
Yeah.
pleasing would come in. Yeah, because, everyone was very into TV, even at that time, which it wasn't very common, but everybody had a TV in the room and everybody was very focused in the outer. And then I would be like, okay, I have to make sure everyone's okay. And so I grew up very quickly and I was with a job because my mom, when my parents got divorced, wasn't able to earn very much and there were four of us. And so I was like, I'm going to not need anything. I'm going to get a job and do my schooling and all of this stuff. And make sure that everyone was okay. And both of my parents were coming
Wow.
to me for advice at that age, at 14, 15 by then, were like telling me things that I should not have
Yeah.
been getting from them. And I again began to feel this heaviness, this sadness
Yeah.
from my family. And I can remember walking into a mental health clinic and I said, "Can I speak to someone? I'm just really upset." And I talked for about 45 minutes and she said, "Sweetheart, we need your parents to come in." So it was clear that I was being kind of forced into a
Yeah.
driver's seat position and I was not
Yeah.
prepared for. And so I had to adjust myself. And why parents, had different reactions to that request, were clearly probably understanding that I probably shouldn't be as involved in their business as I was. um, but needless to say, that
Hmm.
adversity created in me a desire to explore this inner part of me that was
Yeah.
clearly strong, right? There was something about the journey that I chose. I do believe that we choose to come into the bodies and the
Yeah.
families that we do. Back then, I used to joke around and say, because I'm from New York and everyone in my family has
Hmm.
a New York accent. And I never had it. So I would say, oh, maybe I was switched at the hospital. I used to like tell myself these stories because I didn't feel like
Yeah.
I belonged there. Um, but needless to say, over time, I began to really start to stand up for myself as I got outside help and as I deepened my yoga and meditation. And as I did that, I got a lot of pushback because it was like suddenly, wait a minute, you're supposed to be here to help us. You're supposed to be here to, make
Yeah.
sure we're all okay. And when I started doing that for myself, there was a lot of resentment, there
Wow.
was shaming, there was guilt. And I started to, I was always a very good student, but I
Yeah.
did work for that. But I can remember hearing the stories of my family saying, "Oh, Dee, she never really has to work that hard." And I thought, wait a minute, like I just do what I need to
Yeah.
do for myself over here. And all they saw was the helper. All they saw was the rescuer. And so I decided that I wanted to get away from it. And at 17, I said, I want to apply to go to
Wow.
college early. Now, first of all, no one in my family, especially women, but no one
Yeah.
ever had been to college. And even my guidance counselor told me, you're not a shoo-in for that type of program, Denise. And I was like, hmm, that's just a phrase I'll
Yeah.
never forget, right? But I had teachers, and this is probably why I became a teacher at some level, that saw my talent and gave me that validation, which I was so
Yeah.
desperately seeking. I was seeking that by being the rescuer in my family. But these teachers would look at my writing or my art or work that I would do, even my facility with
Yeah.
different languages, and they compliment me, and I would, are they talking to me? Like, it was a shock. It was a surprise. And I realized that I had really downplayed my strengths because they were not appreciated to be
Your
brought up
family. Yeah.
in my family environment. So I went ahead anyway, and I said, I'm going to apply. I applied to 4 colleges. I got in
Wow.
3 out of the 4. So there you go. Is how are you defining yourself? Is it by what other people are telling you can and can't do? Or are you trusting that there's some reason
How
that you're
did you
doing this?
feel,
Now,
Denise? Hmm.
ultimately, over
How did you
time,
feel?
I felt
Yeah.
so validated, so seen. And, the one school I didn't get in
Yeah.
was Ivy League. So, I mean, it was a reach for me, but at the same time, I was able to go. And, but what was important was that the messages all along, from the time I started the question of doing it to the time that I actually got the acceptance letters, I was given
Wow.
nothing but resistance by my family. And so I think it's important for people who are struggling with resistance from their family of origin, no matter what age you are, that you can hear them. They can certainly have an opinion, but it's not who you are. And it's not who you're meant to be. If you feel a calling to something else, you owe it to yourself to trust that calling. And these days it's like, if something worked like that, worked for me for a long time, and I did, have success in that career. But sometimes it's something that you follow that, and it maybe leads
Yeah.
to something different, and that's okay. We are often, taught from our parents and from, old sort of school thinking that everything is black and white. you know the days, I mean, let's face it, the days of like having one career, one marriage, all of those things, like, those are
Yeah.
not the
Yeah.
days anymore. That was maybe what our parents saw in their parents. You know what I'm saying? But I mean, let's face it, with all of the transformation going on,
Yeah.
we can't live based on those outdated
Hmm.
beliefs anymore, right? So that was the beginning of me seeing that the resistance that comes up
Yeah.
through life is your soul just whispering, there's, something else
Yeah.
you need to try. This is great. You're good at it. And I think that's the hardest thing, is being good at something and being still able to say, but there's something
Yeah.
more calling me, and being okay with, like, no one can take those degrees away from me and those experiences. In fact, the work that I did with schools and that became rescuing work in a sense, because I ended up working with all at risk
Yeah.
students in schools, all at risk regions eventually, and challenging people to find the root cause of why they were
Hmm.
persistently failing, why they were unable to
Yeah.
see certain kids, why they were unable to serve all kids. They were very programmed to serve a
Yeah.
bell curve, which again was a 30-year. I can remember pulling that out for them out of the district that I work in and saying, 30 years ago, we had this population. Now we have this population.
Yeah.
What have you changed in what you're doing? Have you really acknowledged the differences in the
Yeah.
kids in front of you? Or are you doing the same thing that you've always done? And, as you said earlier, I would have
Mhm.
people laughing,
Yeah.
crying, walking out of my meetings because I was
Yeah.
asking those hard questions. And I felt like it was my job to be in there to take
Hmm.
the flack, but to know that sometimes it is better for a teacher. I would have teachers come to me after privately and say, "Do you think that I should consider leaving, the profession?" Because they were starting to
Yeah,
look internally and say, gosh, you know what? I'm really not even paying attention to what
yeah,
the kids
yeah,
are doing. These were teachers I had more of a relationship with, where I'd sit in there watching a lesson and all the kids could see was the back of their head because they were writing on the board endlessly. And I thought, gosh, this is bringing me back to Catholic school when they wrote on the chalkboards the whole lesson and
yeah,
all you did was copy it. And I'm like, we don't live in those times anymore. And the kids are back there playing basketball. The kids are doing all this stuff and I'm sitting in the room and they don't even flinch. So, but bringing people to that point where they had to ask
yeah,
those internal questions became like the focal point of whether I was working with an individual or an
yeah,
entire school or a team trying to get at the roots of things was
yeah,
shaking things up and having people see that, just because something externally looks like it works doesn't mean that it's really working. And so I would tell people, I advised this one teacher. I said, you know what? I think you would be great
yeah,
for high school, but with fifth grade, I don't think you really feel comfortable. And he was like, oh my gosh,
yeah,
you're
yeah,
so right. You're so right. So but helping them to get there by giving them the questions. And so part of the work I did there was about root cause analysis, using a model to say, like, oh my gosh, we're doing 100 different things. How do we even
yeah,
know what's working? And that's often where we get to in our lives, where we become so overloaded by the
yeah.
responsibilities, the jobs, the roles that we have, that there's no time for
Yeah.
us.
After you sold everything, Denise, and that was gutsy to do
Hmm.
that. After you have this inner calling, this tug, I tell people when that's there, that restlessness is because you haven't arrived where you need to be as yet, but you're on your way. So here you are, you've had this restlessness, and it causes you to sell everything, and you are going to go out there as well, chasing this. Where did it lead you to, Denise? Where did that pull? Where did it pull you?
So it pulled me into the health and well-being because during the time I was an educator, I had gotten a master's degree and I started, being a classroom teacher and went on that journey and ended up being a district leader and everything. But during that time, I began working on my health because I finally had the secure job, the health insurance, all of that stuff. And so I literally went through a physical transformation by taking the time with that new career. I was like,
Yeah.
that's it. Now I'm going to take these health goals and I'm going to make them happen. And I did it little by little, but I transformed myself, my health, my physical health, my weight. I became literally half the person that I was
Wow.
before. And I realized that a lot of the reason that I had gained so much weight was because I was
Yeah.
unhappy and I had fallen out of that sort of service mode, and my soul was crying out for it. And so through the getting the education credential and being seen, and then getting the employment and having the wherewithal, I did the work on myself, and within 2 years I had lost over
Wow.
50 pounds. And I began to have people just asking me. In fact, my trainer said to me, Dee, you're so good at this, why don't you take the course and become a trainer? So that's initially what I
Hmm.
started to do. And then as a teacher, see, there was that servant
Yeah.
coming out again. So as a teacher, I had my little charges in the classroom. I was elementary. um, but women started to come to me and say, "Oh my gosh, I didn't recognize you. What did you do?" Da, 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 da. So I started having women coming to my home before and after school because at that time we didn't work 12 hours a day
Yeah.
back in the day. And so I started training people that way. And then I got really interested in the nutrition because, as with many programs, you hit a sort of plateau, and so that's when I dug into the nutrition. So my education career has a side hustle the whole time of
Yeah.
health and wellness because I just had
Yeah.
that drive for it. And like you or said earlier, when you have gone through something, people want to get on that bandwagon and say, how did you do it? Because you didn't
Yeah.
make it look difficult. You always come, they used to joke around that I always came in with my lunch bag, and I did. I didn't want to leave things to chance. So and I
Hmm.
did love cooking, being my background. So I just learned to change my cooking away from the healthy or
Yeah.
from the unhealthy to just replacing ingredients and finding I could make really delicious food. And so when my education career was becoming more and more burdensome to me, that side had been increasing, but I had now, of course, as a leader, I didn't have the time. So I was feeling very like that was still calling me to investigate becoming more of a health and wellness coach. And now that the nutrition was coming on board and I was studying that, being a researcher, I have a master's in leadership and education. I have the ability to
Yeah.
read and understand research. So I was so data driven in that for nutrition that I was like, I want to start my own
Yeah.
business full time now. And so I literally was going to walk away and I found out I qualified for an early retirement. I said, thank you. Thank you,
Yeah.
listening to your soul, right?
Yeah.
What a gift. So I was able to pay my rent while I start the business and
Yeah.
not feel the pressure and so forth. So I moved away, sold the property, just did all of this stuff. And it
Yeah.
was quite a big risk. But let me tell you, I was
Yeah.
rewarded for listening to my inner being. And that's where, to me, the example of this, within the first year, I met two clients who hired me
Wow.
for all of it. And this was back in the day when you were going to their homes 3 times a week, fitness, nutrition, all of the advice that you could want. And they were transforming their lives. And so they became my, sort of little spokespeople, whatnot. And I, and as I said, up until the pandemic, that was going
Yeah.
very, very well. And then I had to pivot again and say, wait, there's
Yeah.
more tools that I
After
need.
the pandemic came, because the pandemic came to, I believe, as a collective, we called it, and we lost many, but there
Hmm.
were many babies given birth, if you will, books, businesses, things that were people were pregnant with
Yes.
that had not that situation come, a revisiting as to what is really interesting in life and what is more, and people began to prioritize their life and their what became, important was the job, and lots of people quit the job, but
Yes.
RVs builders were having so much problems trying to keep up because people were just getting out and finding a new life, if you will, a new way to live, and it gave birth to much. So here it is, it came into your world and it transformed you, changed you, and caused you to investigate how you are doing what you were doing before. As you saw, and the pressure, if you will, to cause you to reinvestigate, what began to happen to you? Did you begin to change as you be having more and more time and you're noticing things and it's slowed down and the busyness of working and the distraction of working is not there and you have time to look in? What
Yes.
did that happen? What happened to you
Yeah.
at that time?
It was quite that was a big
Yeah.
dark night for me because what I realized is that a lot of my focus
Yeah.
became my career. Being a pioneer of my family to even have a career, a professional career, to have, gotten 2 master's degrees and broke away from what women were expected to do, and I jokingly talk about this, but when I look at the history of Italian and Greek culture, like women had
Yeah.
zero rights. And as we know, they had zero rights not that long ago. I tell people that in the 70s, women weren't even
Yeah.
allowed to have a credit card. They're looking at me like I'm crazy, but I'm like, no, this stuff is real. But it's very deeply
Yeah.
seated generationally. And as we said before, we're energetic beings. And so that exists within us. So what became evident to me during that time of the pandemic and having more time, pardon me, to go inward was that I had put all that energy
Yeah.
into career focus and into the passion of what I loved, helping and serving others. But the side of me that really was still stuck back in those old ways was the side that impacted my relationships with people. And so when it came to personal relationships, I ended up marrying a man who was a very wounded
Yeah.
person as well. In fact, we met in a job, and he was like, I'm never getting married, having kids. And I was the same. I was like, I'm never getting married, having kids. And then we became best friends, and then we got married and had a kid, you know? So, but, but there was a reason why that happened, because my energetic signature was still very much an
Yeah.
expectation of marriage and children. That was really what women in my generational history were expected to
Yeah.
do and what they did. And so I think as I approached my late 20s, I began, and, of course, I had this relationship with him
Hmm.
for a while. It was like almost like there was that, they could say
Yeah.
the ticking clock, but I think it's
Yeah.
a subconscious clock. It's there. And so it was like, I had sort of an awakening of like, I should do this. So the relationship part, I did not realize I was kind of
Yeah.
repeating those patterns. And that only a couple years into the marriage did I realize that really we were
Hmm.
better as friends, and that there wasn't a two inner beings intermingling and seeing each other. It was more like two
Yeah.
wounded people who were clinging to each other. And so I realized that that part of me wasn't an area that I did all the work in. It was more of like fighting the battles of becoming something outside of that family expectation,
Yeah.
cultural expectation, patriarchal. Doing all of that was where all my energy went. And when I started looking at the relationships, even after, I got divorced and everything else, I was still attracting very
Hmm.
needy people.
I think the same.
And I realized that that's the
Yeah.
pattern I was used to. I was used to being the helper, and the helper doesn't seek people who, and of course, this is all subconscious. I wasn't running
Yeah.
around saying that, but I can remember my girlfriends and I talking about, dating and so forth. And we'd make our lists of what was negotiable, we were doing everything we could consciously, right? But when you look at the pattern, like I said earlier, you find the emotion, and then you look at the pattern and you see that across all these different people, the pattern is that the people that you're hooking up with are people who need you and have like literally
Yeah.
almost nothing to offer you.
The Jesus syndrome. I told him. I said,
So,
I don't want to be Jesus
oof,
anymore because they killed
yes,
him. So I know I'm dying too. So I would tell him. I said, oh no, I don't want to be. Yeah.
yes. And it's like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, and I would just like, but Dee, your
Yes.
energetic signature that you're putting
Yep.
out there is to show people how much you have to
Hmm.
offer, and you're a great cook, and you're a professional, and you keep a beautiful house, and you know well, you're putting yourself out there like you're a piece of
Yeah.
property for sale. Then that's what you're going to get. And so I love to refer back to
Yeah.
Dr.
Hmm.
Bruce Lipton, his biology of belief, that what our cell, down to the individual cell,
Yes.
has a consciousness. And if our consciousness is still stuck in that pattern of, well, like for example, people will say, well, cancer's in my family or whatever, you're holding on to that in your
Hmm.
very cells. So I believe that that part of me never really got healed, even though I did a lot of therapy in my 20s, even before I got married. And then after I got married, did all types of psychological therapy, and nothing against it, but it really just healed some of the surface. Like I was able to consciously
Yeah.
understand what had happened in my childhood, but that didn't fully process it for me. So when the pandemic hit, and I started looking around again, and I had moved to LA, so it was a whole different story with meeting people much harder than where I had lived before. And everyone seemed
Yeah.
like the same. And I thought, Dee, there's one common denominator here. You are pulling them into you. So I said, that's it. I'm cutting off dating, and I'm going
Yeah.
to date myself. I'm going to figure out this mess. And so through a journey of, just again, I started journaling, meditating, and really taking up yoga again. All of the different limbs of yoga have always been very resonant with me. And I started to be able to sleep better, like so many things. The emotions
Yeah.
started to come down, and I realized how out of control. And when we are not connected with our inner selves, our emotions are based on
Outside.
what's happening
Yeah.
outside of us. Yeah, that's where the reactivity, the triggering, all that stuff becomes so out of control. Because why? The only place we have control over is
Yeah.
our internal world. And if we've given that away, and so forth. So that's where I had to really, so I did a whole process where I actually dug
Yeah.
into archetypes, not the Carl Jung, but sort of a newer version, Carolyn Mace. And I mapped my family,
Wow.
and I mapped my friends and
Uh-huh.
significant people, and I put myself in there, and I was the wounded healer. I was the rescuer. I was the mystic. I had all of that stuff within me, but a lot of those roles became
Yeah.
too prominent
Yep.
that I couldn't
The
develop
other positive.
the
Yeah.
positive
Uh-huh.
sides of them,
Uh,
you know. So that's where during that time and disconnecting from that whole world, I realized that the
yeah.
sadness, the anxiety I was feeling, the worry, the fears were all related to that I needed to really challenge where I
Yeah.
got my strength from,
Yeah.
and that it needed to be more internally. And that's really the where I feel like I could really help people turn their
Yeah.
perspective on its head and see that, the emotions and the external don't have to have so
Yeah.
much power over
That's
you.
a powerful revelation that when we start seeing the connection, then we are able to deal with the subject. And once it is revealed, that trauma and all the digging, as you see it, when you bring the awareness of it, it's amazing how fast you heal once you recognize it and you see it. You're like, oh, that's what it was, and boom, you right there is your freedom once you recognize it. And in the recognition of that, you
Yes.
have your freedom, your release, and you're able to begin to move further and deeper in. You're going further in your journey and deeper in your journey. And those two combination is always a powerful process, if you will.
Yeah, so I love to teach people, first of all, that healing does not have to be reliving every
Yep.
detail of every negative
Mm-hmm.
choice you ever made, every negative event that ever happened, right? Because as you and I have shared,
Yeah.
we've had plenty. And it's a journey of self-awareness that has to include a desire for
Mm-hmm.
something different, a different result, has to include a
Mm-hmm.
self-awareness practice, whatever that is for other people. And it has to have that self-compassion. Because if we can't forgive ourselves because things didn't go as planned or we made some bad choices, the fact of the matter is we're here right now. We're saying we don't want to live in this perspective anymore. We want to change it. And we know that now there's so much research about how the tools of self awareness, whether it be meditation, breath work, sound healing, any of it, that we can change our
Yes,
brain
easily.
waves very
Yeah.
easily. And so if we can become
Yeah.
more super chill in whatever way that is, whether it's morning, night, I've had people tell me, I don't like meditating in the morning. Fine. Find your time. There's
Yeah.
no written rule that it has to be a certain way. Just because, the morning before when you wake up and the evening before bed, you're closer, I tell
Yeah.
people, to that veil
Mm-hmm.
of your subconscious. It can be easier, but maybe you like walking out into the wilderness first or doing it while you're walking. Find what that is for you, because the closer you get to that, the closer you get to, I tell people this, like when it's also the
Yeah.
same morning and night, we can look at that
Yeah.
in terms of lifespan. When we're born 0 to age 7, and as we come to the end of this body's life, we go closer to
Yeah.
that veil as well. But we can find tools to help us access that deeper when we're in
Yes.
that middle place too. Because after all, it's about enjoying the journey, even if we're not exactly where we want to be right now. If all we ever do is just think about what we don't have, we can't manifest it, right?
Yeah.
Everyone's talking about that these days. So I like to, to pull people in with the story of how people pleasing literally almost took me
Yeah.
down out of career, out of, happiness, out of all of that. And to understand that it's because of the changeability, the plasticity of
Hmm.
our brain, that we are just beginning to
Yes.
scratch the surface of
Yeah.
what's possible.
And
And it doesn't take all of what we
yeah.
thought that it took. I mean, when you look at some of the even decades and hundreds of years ago, what they used to do to
Yeah.
people's brains to
Yeah.
try to change things, it's like, no, it's pretty subtle, actually.
And I tell people the same thing, Denise. I tell them that meditation is done in many different forms. I like the classic form of it, because that's how for my personality, that's what it does. And I just like that. Others, I remember I
Sure.
interviewed a woman and she said her time of meditation was when she was vacuuming. And I can actually see it. I could see that bringing her into a form of meditation because of the constant moving and stuff like that and the rocking. And however you
Hmm.
get there. It doesn't
Exactly.
matter. Just find whatever it is because it is a place of power. It is a place of strength. It is a place where you tap into you. And you, in that area, in that meditation, you're giving permission for your subconscious mind to bring information to your conscious mind so that you can partner and begin to move from where you're at. As Denise invited you, that if you're stuck, and everyone that is listening, if you're stuck and you're not happy where you're at, I have someone that I'm talking to that have some tools that can help you to navigate from where you are to where you would like to be. It is not as difficult as you think, but you may be busy because of work, certain things you have to do, and you don't have the time and you need a guide. I like the terminology guide more than coach and all these other things because that's basically what they're
Mm.
doing is guiding you,
Yeah.
and they know the questions to ask you because you are not focused on that. That this individual has been through it. And so she is absolutely listening to you. And as she locates where you are, you would be amazed the tools that she can bring to by the questions she asks you. It will give you the opportunity to be switch your perspective. You'll go, oh wow, I didn't know that I can do that. That's one of the statements that you're going to make when you see that switch. Oh wow, I,
Hmm.
it's that easy. Stuff like that is what that language sounds like when you navigate from one to another. It's that simple. You just have to be made aware of it. And I have someone, a guide that can help
It's
you
simple.
to become aware of it. And we're going to provide all of her stuff. And I want you guys to get in her space and so that you can gain wisdom from her, understanding, insights. These are beautiful tools that you can bring in. She's going to talk to you about meditating, journaling. She's going to talk to you about yoga. She's going to talk to you about powerful tools that have been provided for us all from generations to generations. And you are going to have a conversation. You'll see what fits you, and you will see who you are. Denise, I want to thank you so much for coming here at Threads of Enlightenment and sharing so much of you and the power that is you, the insights and those journey that you had, how you learned to trust the unknown by relinquishing all of quote unquote the material things that they teach us to get. And in all your getting, I remember this Bible verse, in all you're getting, get some understanding so you can get out of where you're at. So,
Right. Get out of
yeah.
your own way,
So
right?
get some understanding, bring someone that is equipped
Yes.
And I always say to people, one of the reasons why I go into these stories is so that you can see that the individual didn't get their um, licensing, if you will, through a masterclass over the weekend. They earned it. They earned it. They
Right.
went through some mess, and they came out, and they have beautified themselves with the changes, and the same thing can be done for you. And again, I want to thank you so much, Denise, for coming.
Thank you, Ken. It was my pleasure. Thank you so much for the
Thank
opportunity.
you. Now is a